Hello class, today we're going to be learning lesson 9-4 in your algebra textbooks. This is on using square roots to solve quadratic equations. We've worked with quadratic equations in the past chapter and a half now, and now we're going to be able to solve them by using square roots. We did graphing in our last section, 9-4, so now if you have your equation and it's in the form ax squared plus some number c, first what you need to do is rewrite it. So any equation that you get in this section, rewrite it so that you simply have x squared equal to everything else. So we're just going to give that the number d. Alright, so I would subtract c in this example and then divide by a, and I would have some new number. Okay, in order to get x by itself now, you're going to take the square root of both sides. So x is really going to be equal to plus or minus the square root of that number d. Okay, so there's going to be a positive version of this and also a negative version. That's what the plus minus means. And when we do this, all right, if we find that this number d is bigger than 0, if it's greater than 0, then we're actually going to find two different solutions for our x. Okay, we're going to find a positive version of that square root of d and also a negative version. If, though, this number d is equal to 0, then there's only going to be one solution, right? X is going to equal 0. And finally, if d is less than 0, okay, which means it's a negative number, then there's going to be no solution at all. So let's do some examples to really show you what this looks like. The first example we're going to do is 2x squared is equal to 8. So like I said in the beginning, if you're given a quadratic equation, first you need to rewrite it so you have x squared all by itself. So in this case, I simply need to divide both sides by 2, and I'm going to be left with x squared is equal to 4. My next step is to take the square root of both sides. So then x is equal to the square root of 4. So I'm thinking to myself, what number times itself is going to give me 4? Well, it's going to be 2. But it's also going to be plus or minus 2. Because positive 2, when you square it, gives you 4. But also negative 2, when you square it, gives you 4 as well. So I have two solutions here. X can be positive 2 or negative 2. If, for example, you have another one that says m squared plus 18 is equal to 18, again, I need to rewrite this equation so that I have the variable squared all by itself. So in this case, I'm going to subtract 18 on both sides. I'm going to have m squared is equal to 0. And I found out before that if that number on the right-hand side equals 0, I'm going to have one solution. And that's because the square root, when you take it on both sides, is going to be 0. The only number, when you multiply it by itself to get 0, is the number 0 itself. So here I have two solutions for my first one. The second one, I only had one solution. And let's try one more example like this. How about b squared plus 12 is equal to 5? Looks very similar in its setup to the second example. I'm going to subtract 12 to get the b squared all by itself. And when I do that, I have b squared is equal to negative 7. All right. And you know what? This was one of my tips at the beginning. If the number you have is less than 0, there's going to be no solution because I am not able to take the square root of a negative number. That's not going to happen. So this is going to be no solution. Because I can't think of any number that when I multiply it by itself, I get a negative number. So this is going to be no solution. Let's try one that's a little bit different. These are all fairly simple. The next one I'd like us to try is 4z squared is equal to 9. Very simple to get the z squared by itself. I'm going to divide both sides by 4. And when I do that, I'm left with z squared is equal to 9/4. And you might be thinking to yourself, all right, I don't know what to do because I have a fraction. But again, think of this as, is 9 a perfect square? And is 4 a perfect square? Well, if it's a perfect square, it's going to be perfectly easy to take the square root of both of those numbers. So for z, I'm thinking, what number, when I multiply it by itself, do I get 9? Oh, that's 3. And what number, when I multiply itself, do I get 4? That's 2. But it can be the positive or the negative version of either one. You can have positive 3 when I square that and get 9/4, or negative 3 and square that and get 9/4 as well. So it's really nice when the fraction that you're left with is a perfect square. But that's not always the case. Like in our next example, I have 3x squared minus 11 is equal to 7. I'm going to add 11 to both sides. When I do that, I have 3x squared is equal to 18. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 3. Look at that. It works out evenly, which is very nice. I'm going to get 6. But the problem is that 6 is not a perfect square. So what do you do? In all of the last examples, we either had a perfect square, and so we were able to find a solution real easily, or it was a negative number and we automatically knew no solution. So if I was going to take the square root of both sides here, how would I figure out what number, when you multiply it by itself, can give you 6? There must be something. Well, if you do this on your calculator and you take the square root of 6, you will get probably a very long number. And so what we're going to do in instances like this is we are going to just round for an estimated number. In this case, we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So it's going to be 2.45. All right, 2 and 45 hundredths, which means it's going to be pretty close to that. So it's not going to be equal to it. It's going to be just about 2.45. And it can be 2.45 or it could be negative 2.45. Right? It could be the plus or the minus version. In this case, I'm just going to write them out both for you. So this is one instance where you're going to be able to use a calculator. The other times you can easily solve the problems mentally. All right, let's look at one more example for the rest of this lesson. In this case, it's kind of putting everything together. I have 6 times parentheses x minus 4 squared is equal to 42. This looks completely different from everything else that we've done in this lesson. But why don't we just try to find out what x could be, so that the number, when I plug it in and I subtract 4, square it, multiply it by 6, I get 42. Let's try to find out what numbers that could be. So what I want you to do first is divide by 6. We're going to do this because we want to try to get the x by itself if we can. By doing so, I'm left with, still in the parentheses, x minus 4 squared is equal to 7. All right? I still don't have x by itself, and I cannot just add 4 because it's inside, it's locked inside the parentheses because of this squared. So to get rid of that squared, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to do the square root on both sides. When I do that, now I simply have 1 x minus 4 left instead of having 2 of them that are being multiplied, and that's equal to still the square root of 7. I do not know what that is. I have no idea what the square root of 7 is, but I know that if I put it in my calculator, I could probably figure it out. So when I do this on my calculator, it's roughly 2.65, okay? Just about 2.65. So I'm almost done. I put the plus or minus because it could be positive 2.65 when you square it to get 7, or it could be negative 2.65 when you square it to get 7. So my final step to get x by itself is I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So my final solution is going to be 4 plus or minus 2.65. So what this means is it's going to be 4 minus 2.65 as one of my solutions, and it's also going to be 4 plus 2.65 as another solution. This is equal to 1.35, and this one is equal to 6.65. So in the end, it may not exactly be equal, so I'm going to put this symbol, but the solutions will be 1.35 when I rounded it to the nearest hundredth, and 6.65. And that's it. So it's kind of combining everything that you guys have learned this year already. Now you're just being able to use a calculator in those rare instances where the number you're taking the square root of is not a perfect square. So on your own, before you come back to class, I'd like you to try these two problems. Try to solve 9m squared is equal to 100, and also solve 4 times parentheses and minus 3 squared equal to 28. And I will check your work when you come back to class and answer any questions you might have.